Hi guys, this is Bill from Spencer1984.com with an update to the Duel Peterbilt. This update has taken a lot longer to get to than I thought it was going to, in part because there was a bit more fiddly work with the Peterbilt kit itself, and also because there was a bit more to do to convert it to the Duel truck than I was expecting. So starting out with what needed to be cleaned up, in the first video, I showed that the engine had been partially assembled, but it turns out that the previous owner had assembled it with putty. It wasn't a model glue or any type of adhesive, it was just gobs of putty that were holding the parts together. So while that made it really easy to take it apart, it did make for kind of an ugly finish that had to have a lot of cleanup done. A lot of sanding, a lot of scraping, but it's generally cleaned up pretty good. There's still a few spots here and there if you know what you're looking for, but not bad. I also stripped off all of the chrome because this kit is got tons of it, but the truck in the movie should have basically no bright work whatsoever. So all the hoses, the pumps, the filters, all that got stripped off, and it cleaned up pretty good. Also, here on the bottom of the transmission, after I sanded the seam smooth, what I did was I masked off the engine and the tailplate, and then sprayed it a few times with some filler primer. So now it's got that kind of rough cast texture all the way around. It turned out pretty good. I'm not really going crazy with getting this smoothed out because once I paint it, I'm going to be adding some grime, some oil, just a little bit of base color, but I wanted to get as much together as I could before I got to that point. And yeah, overall, I think this is coming along pretty decent. So then on to the chassis. Went back and reread some articles that I had set aside, both on the truck itself as well as some models that other guys had built before me. And the more I was rereading it and comparing it to the kit, the more I was discovering that this end of the chassis was going to be a problem for me. For one thing, it needed to be lengthened. The original Peterbilt kit only came up to about here, so that needed to be changed. But the bigger problem was the rear suspension, because the Pete kit had the airbag suspension that was a bit newer than what this truck should have had, and there was at least one scene at the end of the movie where the truck rolled over, and you could see that it was supposed to have a walking beam rear suspension with a tag axle. It wasn't even a dual drive like this kit shows. So what I did was I cut the frame right here, and then this end is taken off of an international truck that I had, which already had the walking beam rear end on it. So it was a lot less that had to be removed and carved up and all of that. It wasn't a straight fit. The international frame rails were a bit smaller than the Pete's, so I had to laminate some plastic top and bottom, as well as change the thickness a little bit. This is going to be plated over, so I'm not really too concerned about that. I just really wanted to get the sides of it cleaned up, and for that, I think I did okay. But the rear end is just about out of the international. The walking beam, the spring, and this axle, that was originally the rear axle on the international. I moved that forward. I changed the brake setup so that it was on the front of the axle now, and also changed up here where the torque bar was, as that was originally kind of a Z shape. So when it was on the back, that bracket was on this side, so that had to be cut off and moved. It was actually a lot more work than I thought it was going to, but overall cleaned up pretty good. And the tag axle is scratch built out of tubing. I've got a bigger opening there than what I need because I'm going to use that to take up any slack when I get the last axle on it. And I also had to lengthen the drive shaft, which that was done with just put a drinking straw over the two halves of the drive shaft. Set one end in, got it close, and then just cut it off until the two universals landed where they needed to be. So that was pretty straightforward. And then front end here is right out of the Peterbilt. The only change that I made is one of the steering arms was missing, and I considered scratch building one, but considering how tight the space is and how little you're going to be able to see it, especially after all the weathering is done, I did cheat on that. So I've just got that arm going right to the steering box. It doesn't have that extra arm in there. But that's okay. I'll live with that. There you go. So that's where I am on that now. This is ready for paint, I think. I'm going to give it one last once over to see if I missed anything. But I'm going to do a base coat of flat black for this. And the engine, I'm going to start with a base of some metallic gray that I had left over from the Cobra build. And then I'm going to build the weathering on top of both of those. The engine is going to have a little bit of Detroit diesel green stuck here and there that you'll be able to see, but I think that gray will kind of look appropriate for a bit of a burned off, oily, greasy dirt color. And as for the chassis, same thing. It's going to have a base of black, but there's going to be enough other colors on it that it should become just kind of a generic dirt color. So there you go. That's where I am on this. I am going to be moving on to paint as my very next thing, so the next update will be a lot quicker than this previous one has been. So check back then, and thanks for watching.